Okay.
Okay, thank you all for coming today. My name is Christy Dodds. I'm with the Outreach School. Myself and my colleague, Meg Wood from Yale are kind of co-sponsoring this. Meg is at a conference today, so she's not here. So you're left with just me, and luckily not just me. Luckily, we brought in some awesome guest speakers, so that's perfect. These sessions are called TnT, Teaching and Technology, and they will try to focus mostly on teaching pedagogy and how to manage technology usage. And that whole series of these next semester, we have 5 semesters. We've done this before. We have one more in 2 weeks, which is about gamifying. So if you're interested in gamification and anything, that will be one of those in a couple of weeks. I can find the exact date. I don't have it on me at the moment. But please come back and join us for that. We provide lunch, literally. We'll put on that last. And move forward from there. We do them all during lunch on a Wednesday. So thank you for coming and come back, bring more people. If you are interested, we will be sitting at home pretty soon here for people that want to have something for next semester. So we know about 5 of these in the semester. If you have something excited about that you've been doing, please send them out. We love to have an invited speaker series, so all the people are invited recently. So you can put on your Vita an invited speaker. And we would love to have, we really are looking for diverse voices from all the campuses. This semester we've had people from education and we have molecular biology and botany today. We have various groups from all over the place. So and we have had in the past had librarians come in and do stuff and all kinds of different things. So please feel free. At our next group, so we're spreading love, trying to spread love. So that's enough about the TnT session. Today we have we're really glad to have the active learning session by Rachel Watson and Callie Nicholas. Rachel is also the chair of the Science Initiative Active Learning Committee. So she's been basically doing nothing but studying active learning for the past, I don't know how many months, a while. And really become, I think, probably an expert on active learning on campus at this point. And so she's going to do this, and Callie Nicholas is a graduate student in botany, and she's working with Rachel on this stuff. So I think that's all I need to say, and we'll let these guys do their thing.
And there are so many familiar faces out there today, and I can say with all certainty that I am far from the expert in the room. There are so many of you that I know the kind of work that you're doing and am constantly, daily inspired by all that you do. So I'm hoping that this can be a very collaborative process and one where all of us can contribute a little bit of our expertise. So we will be doing that soon. I did just briefly want to comment on the science initiative. Things have been rolling along very well with the initiative. There are down days and up days. But one of our objectives with the initiative is to build a new building that will have in it 4 large active learning classrooms. And these classrooms will allow us to teach large courses in a completely different style. So this is one of our goals, and in fact, tomorrow at 5 in the morning, Bree and Kelly and some of the others on the committee, we will be flying out to Minnesota to see some of their active learning spaces. So it's been a whirlwind of effort towards those ends. But I would also like everyone to know that we don't consider that to be the most important part of the initiative. Really, it's all about programs and about faculty support. So it's about events like this, where we're talking with faculty, bringing in their expertise and sharing ours, and really training faculty in active learning and how to implement some of these techniques in your classroom. However, Kelly and I also like to try to walk the walk. So today we're going to have you doing some active learning exercises, and we're going to actually begin there right now. And so Kelly, I will let her say a bit about herself in a moment, but she's the absolute first grad student that I've ever had the opportunity to work with very closely. So I get a little jazzed about having her with me and a little nervous because she's my most important critic right now. So she and I are learning together. But here's what we want you to begin with. You've been handed, as you came in from Kelly, a sheet with either a term or a definition. And we are going to get messy. And I realize you may already be a little messy from eating chili and all that, but we want to actually get you up and out of your seats, and we want you to find the match to either your term or your definition. And I promise you that it is out there. So mill around and talk with people and see if it looks like your term matches their definition or vice versa. And when you found that other person, come together for a moment and we're gonna have you do one more thing, okay?
And be careful.
It's like the grocery store, shop the perimeter, right? Oh my goodness. What are the chances of that? That gives you extra time to talk about it, right? Most important.
Do I match you? You're not playing.
And then Christy, I realized, do we have tape so that they can
No, we got it.
Okay. Okay.
Put it over there.
Yeah. So once you have found your match, you have met your match. I want you to think about, and actually this is a challenging question because it may not be a right answer. We want you to think about whether you would identify this particular activity as being most informed by behaviorism, cognitivism, humanism, or constructivism. And then we have some little stickers. You're going to stick yours up there, and you can look what other people are doing too. So there's no cheating around here.
This is tough, huh? I need a friend. Oh man, we don't have any of those things. You have friends? You want to be my friend? You know what? I would love to be your friend. I didn't get my piece of paper though. Oh man, I can cut it out in my case. Okay, studies. There we go. If you want to play with I'm your love, you can come over. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's all lecture. Yeah, right. And well, and honestly, like some degree programs out there, like your adult learners, these are the kinds of things that you might need, concessions, and then no, yeah.
I name names. I was going to take a grad class. It was all like, you're learning about how to give feedback.
Yeah.
Like, I will respond to I will give you grades twice in the semester.
Right.
Should I zoom in on something?
No, there's somebody.
Yeah.
For
No, and I won't go there any weekend,
No.
or after 5 or before 8. Yeah, and it's like it goes against everything.
I just turned this thing down. I guess we don't have to worry about that.
Right? Nope, I've been there. I hear you.
Very color coded. We had one of these kind of like this, and they did group work, and we set it at a table, and we turned everyone else's microphones down, and then her little speaker was just her, and she just worked, and she would just chime the group, and she could hear them because their microphone was still open, and so it was Mary was just sitting there, and she would just go, well, what about this? And it was hilarious. Yeah.
Dude, I like that. I like that. Right, exactly. I'll give you just one more minute to finish your discussions and find your way back to your food. I love it.
I'm going to do box 10.
Oh my goodness, I love this. I've been like envisioning over the last night, like last night I was up in the middle of the night and I was thinking to myself, I wonder which category is going to be the fullest when we get done. And my thought was that this was what it would look like. That, that constructivism would be the most highly packed with action. Because constructivist theories do say that all learning is active, right? And this is something that is a very big buzzword in all theories of teaching and learning right now. Constructivism and the practice of building knowledge, actively building knowledge, is very, very much what is partially informing the practices of active learning. So I want to pick on the group that put theirs under behaviorism, because motivation was so beautiful. So you're actually one I don't think we've ever met. So help me with your name. So this is Siobhan. And yeah, tell us about your motivation. Cool.
And we were thinking about Skinner, E.F. Skinner, and about how teaching manifests in behavior, but we didn't actually know that.
See,
And that
I can't do anything if I can't remember. Let's take some.
Right. So the motivation, I love it. It was the column that looked really lonely, and it seemed like, maybe it needed a little bit of action. And I feel like that's a very valid argument, where I also believe we could have chosen to put many of these in more than one category. And I think it was Amy who was over here at the last minute thinking that, in fact, she wanted to put her case studies into both humanism and constructivism. Was that whose group was it? That was your group? Yeah. And so I think we could argue that they might belong into more than one category. I'm going to talk just a little bit about these learning and teaching theories. And really, I'm sure that many of you have thought about these at some point or another. Maybe it's been as simple as when you sit down to write your own pedagogy. Maybe you have written your teaching philosophy for some sort of job that you've applied for a position, and you've thought about the way in which these philosophies inform your practice. And you're absolutely right that behaviorism, we might think of as being one of the oldest philosophies right around the turn of the century, and thinking about scholars like Thorndike and Skinner, and this idea that all learning is manifested by an overt action that we can see. So what is the most famous example of behaviorism? Hit us. Pavlov, right? So you ring the dinner bell and drooling your curse because the dog knows that it's going to get reward, right? And this is that idea of encouraging the positive behaviors, whether that be with a dog bone or whether it be with some sort of positive reinforcement for a behavior, and recognizing learning as an overt behavior. Now, it was the cognitivists that first came around and challenged the notion that all things could be distilled to the idea of just a behavior that comes from the learning. And they said, wait a minute here, there's so much more going on in there. I mean, in a learner's mind, we can't account for all the ways in which they're challenging scaffolds and rebuilding those scaffolds and the thought processes that are involved in what might eventually be an overt behavior. But we lose something very rich when we don't think about the inner thought. And some of the scholars, and let me ask you, who are some of the scholars that we might associate with this richer, more introspective process of learning? One very famous one, Maslow, right? What does Maslow talk about? The hierarchy, right? That unless we have our basics needs met, which is why we feed you lunch, right? Right before we talk to you about cognitivism, we're meeting those bottom tiers of Maslow's hierarchy. And then we know that those upper tiers are things like self-actualization, right? So we're seeing some of that. So humanism was also highly impacted by Maslow. We could also think about the ways in which cognitivism looks at, there's other facets of it, such as social cognitivism. This means that we're impacted by our environment. And Arthur Bandera, he talks a lot about this idea that we need to establish feelings of self-efficacy. And so, hang on a minute, behaviorists, we can't just look at that and say, you know, hey, if a student feels that they are, they have high self-efficacy, what does that mean? Like, distilled down to a simple term, like Joe Blow term. Great things of self-efficacy. Yeah, confidence. But we can't really distill that down and say that in someone's overt behavior, we're able to monitor confidence, right? So cognitivists are saying, yeah, we need to think about more than just that overt behavior. And humanists go one step further. And this is where it's so cool, because I had hoped that the one thing that would land in humanism from all of these active learning exercises is experiential learning. Because when we start to get to humanism, and this is where I identify as an educator, I say that I'm mostly humanist with a little sprinkle of feminist and a lot of Paulo Freire's social emancipatory theories, right? The idea that students can change and grow as scholars, that they can have transformational learning moments. And that active learning, and even more so experiential learning, and even more so action learning, right? That comes into Maslow too, this idea that at the top of that hierarchy might just be a feeling of not only self-actualization, but wanting to be involved in the actualization of the earth, right? Saving the earth. That's at the very top of that hierarchy. So this is where we start to get humanism in. And guess who else is here? Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers says that all of our teaching should be student-centered. And one of the big efforts in active learning is something called Scale Up. Who's heard of Scale Up? Anybody? Sweet. Yes, people on my committee. But give us a little feel for what Scale Up, anybody know what it stands for? Scale, SC. Student-centered, active learning, right? So it's actually taking into account all of those things. So this idea of being student-centered, when coming up with activities, thinking about, and if I were to define to you in one fell swoop active learning, I would say that it's asking yourself, and actually I will attribute this in part to John Wilford, one of my coworkers. Whenever I ask him about how he ensures that active learning is happening in his classroom, he says, every day I ask myself, what will my students do today? I know what I will do, right? And a lot of professors go into the classroom knowing what they will do, what I will do today. But when you can ask, what will my students do today, then you're thinking about active learning, right? Pam does a lot of this, and I love that one of the things in the exercises Pam, tell us really quickly one of the coolest things that you do in your clinical biochem class.
Well, the coolest thing is that I changed it. Because part of that is yours, but there's always a way of improving whatever you're teaching, even if you got active down, you can always improve. So I think that's probably but I consider myself very student-centered, and I try to get students to apply things in two different ways. One to solve problems, and one to actually enact. So we enact by a lot of mechanisms in place. And students 15 years later will come back and tell me what enzyme they were in one of the ways.
Yeah. And they're so much fun to watch. The students send out invitations to the rest of the faculty, and we go and watch them do their play. And yeah, well, impossible. So I love that one of these actually did talk about doing the skits, as a way of learning. And it's cool to think about how we can even do that for biological mechanisms, right? Advanced clinical biochemistry. And it's not too cheesy, right? It is the thing that lets them remember it. And I love that that is something that they come back many years later and talk about. So many, as I said, so many of you doing so many of these things. And I do think a lot of this active learning situates here in constructivism, where we talk about the learner constructing meaning. Now, one thing that I'll just briefly say is that, and I want to hand things to Callie here in a moment, but I'm a cautious constructivist. And the reason for that is that I think it's easy to say, okay, well, if in fact we know that a learner constructs their own reality from the scaffolds that they have, which is pulling together cognitivism and constructivism, and if they're, impacted by the environment that they're in, some faculty think, well, if I just hand them the materials, they will construct the same meaning from those as if I put in a heck of a lot of work to serve potentially as a role model, somewhere I got that in there, as a role model that my students, no matter what I do, will construct the same meaning. And that's why I say I'm a cautious constructivist, because I think it can be grounds for being a lazy educator. So we don't want that either. I think a lot of time and effort and energy has to go into facilitating these kinds of activities that are very active and where learners are constructing their own meaning. But so at the same time as we're letting them go for it, we also have to play a big role, I think, in that. So cautious constructivism. I love how that came out. And I'm going to let Callie talk a little bit about some of these specific activities and maybe how they fit on what we would consider an active learning spectrum.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. All right. So you guys may recognize some of these words, terms up here from your handout and from your initial activity that we went through. So I would like you to just take a moment for a second and see where they fall along this continuum. So this was developed, and it kind of looks at the continuum of active learning strategies. And we know that a lot of us try to do active learning strategies, and it's hard to start to get going at first. Sometimes you might start minimally and you might start asking questions, right? But when you get to these complex categories like experiential learning, it may take much more time to develop this curriculum, right? It may take, you have to do like a whole curriculum change, whereas some of these can be a little bit more simple. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of self-reflection about what you guys have experienced as students in your past, and then also what you have experienced as educators. And so just to give you a little bit of clarity with the instructions, we are going to walk the line, this metaphorical uphill line. We will not have to go uphill today, so don't worry, we're not on a mountain. But these are the two questions I'm going to ask you. And so we're going to have everybody stand up. And because the way the room works, we're going to actually do a corner, right? And so where Rachel's going to be standing, that is 100% lecture. That's down here in Simple. We worked really hard. We've got an awesome lecture. We're ready to go, right? And then you're going to start to think, how much time do you spend lecturing, right? 80%. Are you starting to include more active learning? And then go up to 20%. So I'm trying to give you a range here of what, because of course I don't think all of us, maybe some of us are there yet, but I don't think all of us quite there have all of our classes at experiential learning as much as we'd like to. Unfortunately, things like money, right, have a factor. Funding can't take all. I don't have a magic school bus, but one day. So I will have a Halloween costume. That's Miss Frizzle one day. Okay, so that we don't have to do you first, like as in how you teach first, let's just think about other people. And so all of you guys stand up and migrate towards Rachel and Christy. And that is 100% lecture. So that's over here, right? 100% lecture. So we're good. The very first one will do what you've experienced in your past. What you've experienced in your past. And so let's look at 80% of the time, what lecture or where along the continuum have you experienced?
So you, as a student, if you feel like you've been mostly immersed in lecture, you're right. You feel like you make experience.
All right. So let's do 80%. So 80% of the time, you're almost always being talked at. No? Oh, that's so fantastic. All right, but let's go now maybe 50% of the time. Are you still being lectured, or do you occasionally get any of these other activities? Any of you guys get to move forward? Have you got any of these other activities as you move forward? Yeah? Yeah, and this is the end over here. This is the most complex. You're in the magic field bus. All right. So real quickly, I love it. Okay. Has anybody at 10 or 20% of their experience of classes, have you had at least one class that you've had that you say may be over in this category? So now let's do the 10 to 20%. Has anybody experienced this type of teaching and they know they have? So 10 to 20% of the time, can we get anybody else over here? Have you ever experienced an incredible class that's totally, okay. So now here, I'm gonna put you guys on the spot. And I want you to think of the most incredible learning experience that you've ever had. And we're gonna have everybody doing this. We're gonna do a think, pair, share real quick. So right here on the continuum, a think, pair, share. And just right with your neighbor, tell them the most incredible class or way that you've learned, that you've experienced learning. So turn to your partner and tell them. Callie, correct. Siobhan.
I was thinking of the last lecture, which was
It's really smooth. It's
and it was in the MFA program. So writing classes are always
Oh, how fun.
I mean, you can only learn really by doing. But this was the class on mapping. And so we teamed up with artists and we created maps. So it was an atlas.
That's another crappy thing. I gotta keep looking at this. You can't tell what you see with it.
Wow. It felt like you really got something done. Oh, wow.
Yeah, we didn't move much, right? It was really, really
Okay. Wonderful sharing and pairing. Wonderful job. It sounds like we had some amazing classes and attention, please. All right, beautiful job. You guys, if all the classes could do this, I think we'd all be very happy teachers. But now you can either pair and pair again, like pair square, if you'd like. You could pair and then go to 8. And we can share out. So if someone thinks they have the best class and we should all do it, or the best idea, let's share out now to the whole class. Yeah, if you need to put your partner on the spot. Okay, thank you. What was your name?
Diane.
Diane.
Well, I'm taking, is that working? I think so. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Oh, okay. Well, I'm taking an online class and it's nutritional counseling and education. And so we've been learning a lot of things that you're talking about here. And when I first got the syllabus and what we were going to do all semester, I actually got kind of mad because I thought, how am I going to do all this stuff? And there's no tests. It's all experiences and reading. So probably the biggest experience we had to take part in was we have to have 3 sessions with a client. And we have to tape it and then do a self-evaluation and write that up and all these other things. So my first session, I had that. I was kind of nervous, and I did that with this client. And when I listened to the tape, I was horrified because of all the things I did wrong. But I was able to, we had a checklist we had to use. And I was able to see what I did wrong. And probably the biggest thing I did wrong was using a lot of filler words and like, you know. So I was able to think about that. And then my next session I just had last week. And we've been learning about all these cognitive restructuring. What else? Brief therapy, things like that. So I'm thinking, how am I going to incorporate all this? So I was kind of worried. Sat down, I was much calmer this time, and I just listen. And the thing is, you're supposed to listen, not talk, not give them information. You listen. So as I listened and she was telling me all these things, I kept thinking, oh, I can do this, I can do this. So I was able to do a brief solution-based kind of a interaction with her, and then we were able to do a behavior chain with her. But things that I learned about in the class, just reading, I was able to incorporate. And if I hadn't have had that experience, I wouldn't have really learned those things like I did. So it's really pretty incredible.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Anyone out there? All right. So let's be a little more self-reflective now and think really about how you have taught your own classes. And I understand that this may almost be like a timeline, right? When you began, maybe you were all lecture and you progressed, or maybe you've been non-traditional for a long time. But let's do the same thing with starting over there with your personal style of teaching and how you've done that, starting with lecture and moving up to where you feel you've gone now. And if you did it backwards, just don't worry about it. Just think about it, reflect upon it. Where do you teach most of the time? So where do you go teach most of the time? What do you teach?
Well, I feel like you're discussing all the time, and students drive it, students present.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, most of the time. And now I'm going to ask over here just what these wonderful people teach so that we can get a feel for what is being taught. What do you teach, and what is your name again?
Oh, my name is Kaisa, and right now I'm teaching a first year honors, so split class, and then I teach research classes.
And you said you do lots of discussion, which is why you feel you're over here. Okay, fantastic. In chemistry, right?
I teach the medical students, and we're going for 100% active learning.
Fantastic. A lot of the medical literature has inspired a lot of this active learning because it works so well. And it's very important that we have doctors that can do everything right. This is fantastic. So I would ask you to now think of, just walk the path of where you would like to go in the future, where you hope to go as you find your way back to your seat. Start to think about that and walk the path. So I just really want you to walk up there and then laugh at this. It's just light. I don't know. I guess I can put it in here. I walk the line. Fantastic job. So we've already done this think, pair, share. The thinking about, but we did it with what was your favorite class, your best class. So think, pair, share works really well. You can call it whatever you'd like, right? And then I always say think, pair, square, because it's nice to join up together. It can be tricky to get a large class discussion after that, so sometimes it may be worth putting into an online discussion, or as we'll continue to talk about, and moving it online to continue that discussion. All right, and I'm running a little low on time. So what I'm going to have you guys do real quick with your group is one that you have not seen on this table. Any active learning strategy. You may have a card that already has an active learning strategy on it. But if you don't have an active learning strategy on it, I would like you to think of one, a new one, if you know of one. If you don't know of one, raise your hand and maybe we'll give you one. But I'd like you to think of an active learning strategy and where you think it would fall on that continuum. So just one more time. Each table has a card. It either has an active learning strategy on it or it does not. If it doesn't, you're going to write it on there, and then you're going to think about where it goes on this continuum. Okay? And try to define it.
Is simple and complex, but it is complete and like also we said, but it is more simple constructivism all the way to more complex humanism, I think. I think that can also be said.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good point Rachel makes. We like to think of it in terms of simple and complex, but when we get down to it, and we use our pedagogy, our terminology, we know that this is much more humanistic. What are you guys thinking? Oh, I love it. I was hoping that. Perfect. Fantastic. Do you guys have any ideas of ones you haven't heard, or?
So what are we supposed to do with which one is not on here?
Yeah, we're just thinking, because this is, even though this feels like a lot, it's pretty minimal.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of them out there that a lot of us are very familiar with that maybe are similes, you know, to some of these.
So is this
It may be. It's just,
but it's not.
It's just different learning strategies that you may use. And then it's the idea that these are kind of less student-centered, and you get more and more student-centered as you kind of go up the continuum.
So one I'm experienced with is problem-based learning, where it's something like week.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of is there, but it's more than just
that. Yes, problem-based learning is awesome. And those guys thought of it too. So if you guys would, instead of doing like problems-based, maybe do like solutions-based.
I know what that means.
So it's really new. You just focus on the solution. Mm-hmm. So it's the same as problem-based learning. It's exactly the same, but instead you're just telling your students, let's focus on a solution instead of solving a problem, right? Which is, sometimes it's the same exact focus.
I think it's the same.
It is, and that's the point. Yeah.
So I taught in veterinary school, and we revamped the whole curriculum to be PBL. And it's not just, you know, a single solution. It's how they react to the certain type of thing.
I love it. Yeah. If you guys thought that great. You can write it on there. All right. Do you guys need help coming up with a new one? Oh, very good. Mm-hmm.
That's like out here.
What is that? Oh, yes. I've heard that.
We do that in the military. So basically have students come in and you have a goal for the course. They write their own syllabus. They write their own what they do. They change it.
Oh, wow. I want to hear more about that. Huh? Sure. All right. I'm reeling you back in now. Reeling. Like I have to dance up here. Cuckoo! I like it. All right, and the hush fell over the crowd. Okay, no, that's a little different age group. Thank you so much. So who would like to come stand up here and show us where it goes. Someone from your table and someone from, yeah, Kyle, awesome. Where would it go on this continuum? Yes, let's do a show of agree or disagree, just like this. Yes, Kyle, do you want to explain what you think it is, or would you like me to?
Well, we thought it was, we took it, we interpreted it literally, and actually go into a place and
Fantastic. That is exactly right. And if you read experiential learning, the same definition often applies. Thank you very much. Bree.
And likely would end up somewhere up here in your inquiry learning, perhaps, in that area. Are you all familiar with learning? So that would be where you're having students identify community needs, right? What sort of services are needed in a particular community, campus community or Laramie community or something along those lines. And then they work with community partners to provide that particular service and do a lot of reflection and discussion of, how are you taking the content from class out into the community, right? How is that helping you understand the course content?
Yes, fantastic. So service-based learning is so important that there might have been a card out there already filled in with it. Raise it up. Yes. So I also find it to be very important. It resembles problem-based learning, but kind of a step up the continuum, right? Because now you're involving the community, you're making sure it's real life, local work, potentially that you're doing, right? You're making a difference for your local community and you feel like you're being a part of it. You're getting membership and ownership. What about this table? What do you guys have? Let's see. Thanks for coming up.
So we picked out of class active learning, which is the challenging one, things that we were having trouble with trying to think of what we could do. So we started brainstorming many different aspects of that. But it falls in a couple different places, I think, but let's put it here.
Perfect. And I really like to think of this, even though it's a scale, but kind of like an escalator that just keeps going up. And depending on how you implement each of these practices, right, you can like take steps up the scale or you're like, oh, wait, down. So it depends, of course, on how you implement these. But thank you so much. And it will move up and down the continuum. Oh, real quick, what else do we have? Oh, how fun. I want to see an example book, sketchbook. That would be fantastic. Did you guys go problem-based? Yep, okay.
We had problem-based learning, you guys have service learning, so we're just, I think we're a step down there because we're going to give them a little bit more framework for the problem they're going to do. And engineering, in our discussion, the difficult problem when you're doing this is knowing where the students are and where you want them to be, because you have to frame the problem in the right context to catch them where they are and move them where you want them to be. And I, in particular, really struggle with this, trying to frame that problem correctly. But if it's done correctly, then students are teaching themselves, which is ultimately what you would like.
And I think PBL is in a completely different ways.
Yeah, right, exactly. Because PBL could fit in a lot of places on that. And a big part of that actually is just how self-initiated is the student learning. So to what extent are they actually maybe being faced with a problem, but that then they construct the ways in which they will find a solution, in which case that can be extremely complex because you decide we're going to try to approach this e-text contamination, right, which is then how you implement filing. We're going to approach it with a bioremediation strategy. And then you have to figure out as an engineer, how am I going to support them doing genetically modified bacterial strains in a lab that maybe isn't equipped for that. That can become extremely complex, right? So it depends on where, whereas, you know, maybe in a think pair share, you give them a problem, you have to talk about it. That's much less complex than actually asking them to solve or present viable solutions for the problem. So, yeah.
So just one thing to address that is we often medical technique up too. They don't know everything yet, so how are they going to solve the problem? But there's also research showing that if you present a student with a question and they know absolutely nothing about it, it still helps their learning later because it kind of piques their interest. So the next time they encounter it. So I've been afraid of that, and I've kind of backed off and thought it's fine to ask them questions they don't know the answer. Because they'll learn it later because you ask the question.
Why is it in research, like how to do like research? So asking them to figure out how to even go about finding what is sort of like the step before.
Yeah.
And after it works really well.
And one of the things on that line that I'm super jazzed about right now is the idea of on-demand content too. So as they come to a problem where they can't make the next step due to a lack of content knowledge, that is just providing a barrier at that point. At that point, creating some sort of means to deliver the content that they need to get over that barrier. And then again, it can become very complex, but it's an awesome idea.
Fantastic. And as we transition to getting some of that content material across through potentially out of class activities like online activities and flipping the classroom, types of things like that, I'll just close and I've got to run off to class, but with a few inspirational photos of place-based learning. You know, when you go and spend a week in the Galapagos, you learn a lot more than you would spending a semester in a classroom. You just do. I mean, I think we've all done it. Same, you learn a lot more when you're out on the field, when you're collecting data in the intertidal. Right? That's my passion. Oh, I'm like a little kid out there. And you learn a lot more. So I'm going to leave this if you wanted to say a few things with that, with service-based learning. And I thank you all for having me, and sorry to run off on you.
Go to class. Go learn.
So one of my greatest passions right now is, in fact, problem-based, service-based learning. And said another way, systems theory, service learning, and that is actually an abbreviation. Right, there's so many, STSL, so systems theory, service learning, meaning this idea that in order to truly solve the most complex problems of the world, we cannot approach them from a single discipline standpoint. We must bring together integrated curriculum and integrated means to solve that. And I love the engineering example because just yesterday I was working with Chrissy and Cody, who are doing their senior design in engineering right now, and they're doing a very molecular-based project. So in order to solve this problem of getting rid of a pollutant in our environment, they're needing to utilize engineering, molecular biology, microbiology, economics, and bringing together all of these interfaces. So that's systems theory is what that is all about. And then service learning, when you bring that together with the idea that you're serving some community organization or a stakeholder, and in engineering a lot of times it is a stakeholder, and depending on your fields, you know, it may be an outside entity that's very invested in the problems that your students are looking at. So right now my students in Capstone, microbiology Capstone, are trying to solve two problems, actually three problems. One problem is Acres Student Farm has had a lot of trouble sustainably growing mushrooms, and so my students are doing controlled lab experiments to try to help them with that problem. Right now as we speak, they're getting video together that will communicate to the partner how they're going about this process, so they're using digital communication. They also wrote an NSF-style grant proposal, so written communication to communicate with the partners as well. as in the end, they will do an oral poster presentation. So we'll get that full COM3 basket, right, of all of those skills. While at the same time, the most meaningful part of that is that they're working to solve problems that are real and that are complex. My other two groups are working, one with the downtown clinic looking at type 2 diabetes and links to probiotics to prebiotics, and then the other group is working on brucellosis and actually is working along with Jerry Andrews up in his lab. So we're bringing in outside experts to help us solve various problems. So it's pretty cool. So this can be pretty complex, and as Kelly said, that one of the barriers or limiters there is obviously funding and just being able to have a class of only 12 students that it's possible to do this kind of learning. So with that being said, I'm going to admit something, don't tell. I wouldn't say that in my progression in teaching, I don't think I would ever want to be all the way over here. And here's why. I truly believe in storytelling as a means to communicate. And I believe it's one of the oldest forms by which we learn. And I know everyone can think of some story that maybe your mom told you every night before you went to bed that was really meaningful in your development. And also, I had a teacher, I think often of her, and she taught me in 4th grade, in 7th grade, and then again in high school. And I will never forget the stories that she told to help me remember history. You know, I will still visualize, every time I think of LaSalle discovering the Mississippi, I visualize her jumping up onto a chair and putting a French flag and that storytelling has, I think, a really important role in our teaching. But here's an interesting thought. What about pulling some of that storytelling out of the classroom and doing it via technology? So vodcasts, and I like to use vodcasts a lot in my teaching. So I actually have today a sample of kind of what I mean by this storytelling, and hopefully we can.
That I get to be with you today, and that technology enables me to be in 2 places at once.
Yeah, and so, yeah, right.
Right now, and also being here to talk about active learning with all of you and to share some stories that I know Kelly has expounded upon at this point. But I want to talk specifically about the fact that engaging students actively in their learning during the traditional lecture period often entails taking a certain amount of the content outside of the classroom. That is, we sometimes refer to this as activity in your class, or when you get an upside down class. There's been a lot of discussion about how to recognize that. So I think the term flipping has certainly become very popular. And just this morning, I was delving into the literature a little bit about the flipped classroom and found an article in the International Journal of Teaching and Learning and Higher Education that references a flipped classroom. And I like the quote. One of the quotes that they use is a flipped classroom represents a student-centered method fostering academic involvement that is recognized as a positive contributor to student success. Anytime you put student-centered and student success, like twice in a sentence, let me just take a moment to say a couple of things about the way in which I like to use the flipped lecture. I believe that not only does this allow you to take content outside of the classroom, freeing up the classroom periods to do lots of active student engaged exercises, but it also enables you to do better than you could have done by lecturing in the classroom. For example, it allows you to take students to a remote location on a field trip with your content presentation. Or it allows you in a lecture-based class to take them into the lab. A good example of this is the biochemistry course that you teach in our department for non-majors. This is the MLL 3610, one of my favorite classes to teach, but it is a lecture-based class only. It has no lab component. So using a flipped classroom enables me to add a lab component. So the two videos that I'm about to show you, the first one is taking students on a field trip to talk about acid-based reactions, acid-based chemistry as an introduction portion of our biochemistry class. And then the second clip that I want to show is where I'm taking them in lab to show me that we can use these free watch videos, right? So students watch before they do class. classroom theory or outside of their typical engagement to take them to places that they would otherwise not go, even if the lecture didn't in the class. And so proud to be joining you today from our dance outside of a place called Peter Edge on the meet that you're very I'm being here, but I have to stay and
Don't fall asleep.
so I got here and what's really cool about the places that happen to be on the class. And so we've got a lot of basic calls in this area. And I actually tried right before I came out to that would have a natural pH indicator in the heat. It's actually got a slide and literary contract, and it's got a natural pH indicator. So I thought that was to see if we can see the outcome of the soil from that pH indicator. So we're transitioning into more complex acid and bases, and looking at eventually we're going to turn our conversation away from science and then have weak acids. And we're going to be looking at the oxidation, pKa, and Ka values, and looking at some natural water that is comfortable in the body, ranging from the natural upgrading to acid all the way to the bicarbonate upgrading to the status of all of the natural upgrading systems, and incredibly pertinent to the testing world. So those of you who are first learners, but also those of you who are yourself elite athletes, much like courses that are elite athletes, using a bicarbonate milkshake is a common performance enhancement within the world of the questioning world. And so I'm going to teach you actually from an article about bicarbonate milkshake system and talk a little bit about that. So in the veterinary topic article, it says milkshake is a bad thing. And at every level of racing, so much time and money are invested in each sport that trainers and owners want to find extra edge that will help get even the most training so manipulating being all the good goals one controversial subject that has been actively administered to race horses since approximately 1989 and has been enhanced performance is sodium bicarbonate. Commonly known as baking soda, milkshake is a whole colloquial term used to describe a combination of approximately 500 grams of sodium bicarbonate composed and often other additives. These substances reduce acidic conditions within acid cells and is not too friendly as water. So our conversation will be turning towards the last section of our conversation. So let's take a minute to take the our natural pH indicator to benjamin alcohol soil. So we're trying to really address the white alcohol class in this area and all around alkalinity of the soil. So we're going to see if we can get our natural buffers convert our natural pH indicator. Now a lot of natural buffers, but I just got to do a little bit about our soil. So we've got here's our natural pH indicator. Here's like a very alkaline soil out there. Oh yeah. So we're getting an interesting carbon change. You see the oh wow, you see the reaction taking place, and we recognize that this is changing from a very purple color to almost hitting this yellow green color. So that's considered in the pomegranate using a pattern. As I was looking back to how the pH indicator started to turn even more of a greenish, almost blue color. So I wanted to take a moment to show you how that reaction had continued as I was walking back. And I also began to synthesize as I was headed out this idea of putting these two concepts together. So what about horses that are naturally essentially the ones that were in the backdrop of accidents? What about the horses that do live in natural conditions where the soil
So this can complement your active learning strategies. So this doesn't feel very active, right? I mean, in fact, we're kind of like, I need some popcorn, chill out and watch a movie. But this is something that you could do outside of class if you wanted to. So telling stories and presenting field trip options and actually taking them potentially into a lab setting where you're allowing them to see something that they wouldn't necessarily see during lecture time. So the idea of a flipped classroom, who's used it? Who has flipped their classroom? Pam, I know it's fun. Debbie, tell us a little bit about what you do with flipping.
Well, I teach online, and so I will do video or audio brief because lecturing is, of course, not great on an online setting. And then we focus the activities, discussion, whatever, on based on that content.
Yeah. And it's really cool to relate that on this discussion of bicarbonate buffering systems in the equine world, I literally got hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of posts. I mean, it's just like this post that's just on and on and on and on, where students are relating their knowledge of bicarbonate buffering and how it relates to sports performance, whether it be in horses or in humans. And so it just stimulates this incredible online discussion. So it's just a really cool way, by starting with a story, that you can get students thinking about the content in a little bit different way. So this being said, I'm sad because I know that this is actually something that I wanted to show Amy, but the one thing that I feel all classes can be enhanced with technology-wise and integrating almost all of those practices of active learning into an online setting is actually just simply using online office hours. And so who has held, whether it be a face-to-face class or an online class, an office hour online? Yeah, you got it. Have you done that? Yeah, tell us a little bit about some of the perks or what happens in it, just basics.
So before I came here, I was a professor used to do in secondary school. We had to get up with the curriculum to be primarily how-based learning. 140 students, so they have an extra lectures and a week on problems.
Okay.
So the chair will answer questions from that whole week.
Cool. And that's a really neat way to go about that, like almost having access to an outside expert through that chat room as you encounter those barriers in the problem solving. So it's one way to almost have on-demand content, like we were talking about earlier, where, type an expert, and this is a really cool idea for technology in active learning as well, is literally having real-time ask an expert. So say that the instructor is working through some concept and it's confusing to the students like right now, if you're confused by something I said, you could actually type into a chat room that a graduate student in the same room is manning, and at the same time they answer that. And it could even be a back chat that's actually on a separate screen. So rather than having like sports bar going on in here, we could have a back chat going on this screen while the slides were on this screen. And having that back chat, although it sounds like that would be very, very distracting, is actually one of my favorite ways to teach, because I get to see what the students are thinking at the time. And they're much, much more likely to engage actively in that online setting than they are in the classroom. It's just less hierarchical. There's less of a power dynamic. I'm probably sitting in my pajamas on my couch. They're doing the same thing. And suddenly it just feels like those barriers are broken down. And so I get a lot more interaction in my online office hours than I've ever gotten in a regular face-to-face office hour. And I actually did have a recording. I'm going to see if I can pull that up. And while I am working on doing that, maybe you all could talk about what you think might be some of the things that would happen during an online office hour, and maybe come up with something that you think would happen online that you don't think would ever happen in your office. Like what might be some, novel things that you'd see in an online setting?
Snowing. Snowing.
Yeah, I noticed that. I didn't bring a coat. I figured I'd be a sweaty mess dragging that thing over here anyway.
Chris,
I'll get a little wet.
can you take a look at this? I'm trying to get it to go a little farther in the clip on conferences. There's a big blue button, and it won't. I just want to be able to show them the back chat. So. All right, let's go ahead and chat. I could overhear some of the conversations. And definitely can hear, different experiences that people have had. And I know some of you have tried online office hours. Who has never tried, doing an online office hour, right? So it's maybe something a little bit new. What about in a group, and it seems like both of your hands went up as you've never done it before, right? Did you come up with anything you thought would be different? Unique? Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's actually really cool because you can pull up, and Chrissy's working on bringing this up, but you can pull up the homework assignment, and you can see here, I've got the homework assignment pulled up, and these are the questions, and then I can draw on the questions. So like the other night, we were working through a problem about setting the reading frame for translation, and I asked one of the students to go in and put a square around it so they can take control of the controllers, and then they can manipulate that and say, oh yeah, here it is, I found it. And it's actually really interesting how likely they are to want to do that as compared to when you say, can I have a volunteer from the audience in lecture who wants to come up here and draw a box around this? The likelihood of that is slim to none, unless maybe you've done the think, pair, share first, where there's strength numbers and their group has said, yeah, do it, and go, but I think it's just much more likely. And one of the things that we do know is that women are more likely to participate online than they are in a face-to-face setting. So it is actually one way that you can increase the inclusivity of your classroom is by having an online component, because women may even over proportionately participate online, whereas men by far over proportionally participate in face-to-face settings. So that's a super interesting one as well. Yeah. Yeah, so this is actually, this is actually for office hours, and my office hours is at night, not during class. You could do this during class, and there are technologies that actually, one of the things that we're working on for the active learning classrooms is having this be something that could be done in the classroom as well. And so that's a hope. Right now it's, during office hours, later, it's not during class, but yeah, it would be great. It would be great to have that. And notice over on the right, I think this is fun because you can see the back chat, and this is where you really see them all answering questions all the time and asking questions, and they get really engaged in this. And I will have usually between, actually it centers typically around 12 people-ish in my office hour, and so they will almost always all say something during that time. Whereas your more traditional face-to-face settings, there's usually someone who is silenced. There's usually someone who feels less bold. But I did hear some interesting discussion coming from Bree's table that maybe my experiences online are not quite what the experiences that they have had. So do you want to tell us a little bit about some?
I don't know. So I was like, maybe one of the things that will come out of this is more instruction.
Yes.
Maybe, like, in my office, typically one student at a time, and sometimes it helps too, but I would say that that's more unique. And so you have like you have questions, right? And the other students' instruction, which is really valuable for those students to have to articulate a response to a question. So that's something that we said.
Yeah, totally. And when I'm in online office hours, I have far more moments of silence than I do when I'm in regular office hours. So I actually will let them sit, and that's fun. because I'm typically not real good at putting the question out and then sitting there for 5 minutes, like in my office, like just, how you coming? You know, but online I can. No, I mean, I'll literally click the sound off. I'll go brush my teeth and come back, you know. I mean, it's great because, and in those moments, peer-to-peer instruction happens and they think about it and they go back to their notes and then they come back and they answer the questions. So it's much more comfortable to have those moments of pause. And it's interesting how that fixes, it's just the simplest on the continuum that we talked about earlier, that moments of pause are really huge in active learning. And that's, yeah. Yeah, so this is in YO courses. It's under conferences. It's called Big Blue Button technically, but on ours, you just hit the conferences feature and it just brings this up. And when you start a session, it will automatically email all your students and say, Rachel having her office hours, want to come? And they can follow a link and come in that way. So it's kind of neat the way that it notifies them. So it's a pretty cool feature. Yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, you can hear me talking.
Actually has a question that is kind of related to question 6. Let's go through question 6 first, and then we'll see if we can answer your question.
Mm-hmm.
So this is
They can. So that's a tricky one. When I've held office hours that only a couple students come to, I swap audio. When I have a dozen or more, swapping audio gets real messy. So I have them chat and I will sometimes respond with audio. A lot of times I respond with chat. It depends on the question, and if I'm posing a question, sometimes I'll pose it, then I'll turn off the audio, and then there'll be chat for a while. And it works super nicely. And it does really allow for a lot of those exercises, ranging from the simple pauses, you know, all the way to, yeah, the peer instruction and things like that, that allowing them to do the activity, you know, saying, hey, I'm going to put the pen in your hands, you circle the start code on, or whatever. Pretty neat. I guess I should stop right now because we're ready to end here in 5 minutes, and I don't want to stop without just having, you know, basic question answer on everything that we talked about today. We packed it in. So there's a lot to think about. Is there anything that has been a burning basic question or large question? Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Yeah, so if you're planning to integrate technology, Christy is an incredible coach. I mean, she is just incredible. And she is in outreach, but outreach is collaborating more with ECTL too. And so then ECTL holds these sessions, and then a lot of peer instruction happens in a lot of these. They also hold touch. Mm-hmm.
Mondays and Thursdays from 1 to 3. Mondays are Thursdays it's Monday and Thursday from 1 to 3. You can just walk in. If you're going to come in with something very specific, like about active learning or something, good idea to email either Meg, Bender, Wood, or I, because we're trying to make sure at least one of us is there. It's basic help for like wild courses stuff. And like maybe so we might try to have we want to talk about it, you know, like say we have to talk about that, so we make sure that somebody in our group is there that knows we talk about that one. We have very
expertise, yeah.
And so we try to match the expertise of that particular session with if we know, if not, we can show up and we may or may not put something that knows that. And we have a lot of great people that know a lot of great stuff. So, you know, even if you miss something,
additionally, we're working really hard right now to try to create faculty cohort for within the science initiative for training faculty as well. And so the LAMP program, which right now it's baby, but we're working on, you know, getting it to grow, and I'll be playing a role in that, and Bree is as well, and Mark Leifert. And so we're working to try to establish more resources, particularly for those that are, you know, science instructors and trying to handle some of these larger courses, you know, the basic biology, and how do you possibly get 200 students, right, to all learn actively. Additionally, right now, some of the botany faculty are doing something called Garden Club, and I actually brought this with me. They're meeting on Thursday nights at 5 p.m. in the gardens. And they're talking about active learning, assessment, metacognition, inquiry-based learning, just, you know, a lot of cool stuff. So I'll pass that around too, and you can maybe just make note of that. I only had a couple of those handouts, but TnTs.
Even if they don't call it directly active learning, a lot of it is about that. A lot of it is about good pedagogy, and a lot of it is to do with active learning. You know, we look at their line there and stuff. I mean, it has to do with that. So a lot of our stuff have a great deal of this kind of content in it, and so it's a good place to come to. And also, I just say, you know, call the UCL and they, you know, they can give you some clearinghouse for figuring out best services help you with that. Or email them or myself, either way we swap it back and forth as is appropriate. So I think that's, is there any more questions? Really encourage you to, you know, try it out. And if you have a question, you're just like, I just don't know how to do this, walk into this talk to people. That's actually what we're trying to do. People are like, well, we should give you extra payment. It's like, no, that's actually what I'm hired to do. It's fine. So that's my job. So, you know, walk and ask questions, do that. It's probably the funnest part of my job. So, and I think it's for you as well. So, you know, please join us. Once again, thank you for coming. And we do have a gamification one in a couple, which is another really one of the on the timeline. There was a, you know, using names section pretty far up the thing up here. So we're going to have one of that. And also, if you're doing any of your teaching online or online, we should be sure to let us know so we can help you out with that. There's a lot when you can teach online on that continuum. Really, basically, be way on the bottom. But if you even do a little bit, you automatically like jump to the middle of that line. Like, it's very difficult to do kind of middle of the road stuff. You're either like doing nothing actively, or you're doing like everything actively.
Yeah.
Online learning really puts a lot more, you know, agency in the students' hands. So you have to they really have to engage and be more active in their own learning than online. So
yeah,
doing that.
It's probably more like protein folding than it is like an uphill battle, right? It's like the more connections that take place, the easier they are to connect, and the more you head towards, you know. So, yeah. Yeah. And one other quick thing, we've created what is at this point still like a really nascent WIO courses shell for just sharing active learning resources. If anybody would like me to add them to that shell, I would be more than happy to do so. Just know that we're just like starting to pull it together, and I envision it maybe growing with just a plethora of resources, but maybe eventually also with examples that faculty put up, you know, that they're doing in their classrooms. So let me know.
You can actually just respond to email or you guys would say I would love to be in that group, and but anyway, just respond to that email. We'll get you covered on that. All right. Thank you very much.
Have a wonderful day.